away from the mines. Ultimately, it wasn't a permanent solution. The mining would continue, and probably at an even greater pace until the Jindahin and the bugs were at odds again. But for now, there was some semblance of peace. While a good thing overall, it meant there was less work for the independent mercs out there, and the DEMC's options were subsequently very limited. One was to take the grind work of guarding the miners, which meant their job was technically to keep an eye open for bugs. Mostly, however, it involved making sure none of the miners tried to steal the merch. The second alternative was to take the more difficult, challenging jobs that would lead them into conflict with the Perdahin terrorists, or freedom fighters, depending on one's point of view, who would invariably try to liberate their people working in the mines, as well as the merch. Guarding the miners was what most of the mercs were doing, so the money that could be made was negligible. Laughable, even. It was simply the kind of bottom-tier work they could take on when they didn't have more profitable business to manage. Mostly, it involved a great deal of sitting around and doing nothing, which was always best done when someone else was paying for it. Still, they should have listened to the warning signs before they picked this particular job up. It involved moving through a troubled region that had already been identified as one where the Purds had established their defenses. By all accounts, they had begun to raid almost anything that came within range. In the meantime, their small team was forced to navigate the top of the ship they were on in order to do their job. The vessel shuddered and shook every time they turned or had to slow to turn. At the same time, they were in the firing line of people who were far more committed to taking the damn ship than the mercs were to keeping them away. Frankly, it was more than a little annoying. If they had to fight a fucking war for the Jindahin, they should have been paid a hell of a lot more than they were. Still, it was a good fight. Better than any they'd been in since the battle with the rock creatures. Chill grasped her weapon a little tighter, narrowed her eyes, and scanned their surroundings to try to determine where their attackers would come from. The ship itself was a jointed shuttle, designed so a vessel longer than 100 yards was able to maneuver through the tight tunnels. It was possible, for the most part, to move around on top of it relatively easily and safely. She hadn't ever seen a vessel like it, and it seemed to have been designed with Mug-9 in mind, which made sense. Many things about the planet required the sentient beings on it to adapt and evolve in order to enjoy the benefits it offered. Most planets had unique challenges that required some degree of flexibility and change, which was indicative of how adaptable the humanoid sentients were to whatever planet they had to be on. Mug-9 presented some challenges that most other planets wouldn't. It had reached the point where many voices had begun to issue calls to simply sweep the planet with another terraformer in the hopes that this would result in much-needed improvements. Of course, that wouldn't happen while they were mining so many veins of valuable merch. Only once they were all tapped out, and it became more expensive to mine from the planet than it was worth, would they start to think about the changes necessary to make it habitable. To do this, they would have to eradicate the choriostorms and the violent shifting of the tectonic plates that caused earthquakes on an almost daily basis. For the moment, however, they were more or less safe underground, although some sections of the planet remained that couldn't be mined by living creatures. These had to be worked on by bots, which meant the work was much slower and more difficult to keep track of. The challenge was exacerbated by the fact that controlling the bots had to be done via comm signals, which were interfered with by the weather. An AI could be aware of a problem with one of the mechs involved in the operation, and it would take weeks before any sentient being would know of it. Thereafter, it could take weeks longer before they could get down to what needed repairs and get to work on it. Safety was a factor, of course, but not the highest priority. Shit, Chill whispered when shots were fired from the other side of the ship as it straightened in the tunnel.
How many of them, do you think?
Ivan asked. Before she could put